lot of material to cover today. It's narrative in the Bible. Narrative just means it's history. It's telling the story of a man named Jacob. Okay? And in 1 Corinthians, in the New Testament, we learn that, like Paul said, "For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock," and so on. And it says, now these things, and I think you can say the Old Testament, the part of the Bible in the Old Testament, these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things. And so when we look at the Old Testament, we can say, well, that was the Old Testament, but Paul was careful to say the Old Testament was inspired by God. God used men to write his thoughts on paper, and one of them was, he gives us the life of Jacob. Jacob was not stellar. Jacob was a flawed man. And we're going to see that, but we will see today that God was involved in Jacob's life. And God was working some things in Jacob that only he could do. So that's where we will be today. So I hope this works. We'll see if this works or if it doesn't. Oh, so the title is, Behold, it was Leah. Anybody know what that's talking about? Yeah, this was the moment in the life of Jacob when God communicated something powerfully to Jacob. So we'll get to Leah in a few minutes, all right? So when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, that was when Laban found his way to Haran, to where Laban lived. When he heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And then he related to Laban all these things. So there was a family reunion in Haran. Jacob found his uncle Laban, and there was this amazing reunion, the sovereignty of God, the sovereign guidance of God in the life of Jacob. So Laban said to him, Laban, when he saw him, said, and it's exactly the same word that you will find in the book of Genesis, when God brought Eve to the man. This is exactly the same Hebrew phrase. Surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. So Jacob stayed with Uncle Laban for a month, and he proved to be a really good worker. That was really important. He knew how to work. He had already been part of the family business back home. He knew about ranching. He knew about management. He knew about animal husbandry, all that stuff. And so when he came to his uncle's house, he stayed with him a month. And Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? So he was really trying. He was trying to say, man, you are such a good worker. You know, I would really like you to stay and work for me for a while. You know, if you have a kid who comes to your house and he works hard, you might say this, like, yeah, I think how much should I pay you? Is that going to be enough, you know? So, tell me, what shall your wages be? How much would be a good wage for you to stick around here? Now Laban, and here's the deal, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. We already saw kind of a picture of her, not her, but you know. And the name of the younger was Rachel. So Rachel and Leah were sisters. Okay, that's pretty important to keep in mind. I'm clicking. Things are just not clicking here. I think Dennis did that. Man. Well, I guess that's all. We can go home. Oh, man. What are you guys doing back there with me?
Trying to get where you were left off at. Is that where you were?
Yeah. It's been there. It's been there for a long time. I like the clicker, but it's not working. What do we do?
Did you turn it on?
It's on. I didn't do anything wrong. Oh, there we go. And Leah's eyes, sadly, they were weak, but Rachel was beautiful of form and face. So they were sisters. Leah was the oldest, Rachel was the younger. Okay? Rachel just had some natural beauty that Leah didn't have. Now, Jacob loved Rachel. He loved her. So he said, I will serve you for 7 years. Part of the problem was that in that culture, if you were going to be a husband, if you were going to have a wife, you had to come up with money. You had to come up with what's called the bride price. And so, I think that when Jacob got to Haran, he didn't have any money. So the next best thing was he really loved Rachel, and he was willing to do the next best thing, which was to be hired out for 7 years in order to pay for, in a sense, or pay the bride price, pay the father off. Today, in our culture, it's a little different, isn't it? You know, your girls get married and the dads have to pay the whole thing. I mean, you know, if you've had a wedding in your family, you guys know what happens. But in that culture, the husband had to pay for and really take care of, in a sense, his bride and pay for her. I think it's a great custom. Oh. Laban says, it is better that I give her to you than to give her to another man. So stay with me. So he was saying, I don't want to give him to someone who worships another god. I don't want to give him to a pagan man. It's better for me to give him to you. And he said to him, stay with me. So that's exactly what Jacob did. Jacob served 7 years. Man, he must have really loved Rachel, don't you think? He didn't play the field and look around. He really worked every day in order to work for Rachel. And they seemed, this is so cool, they seemed like a few days because of his love for her. 7 years just seemed like a short time. That's a great story, I think. That's a great love story right there. So then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is completed. So after the 7 years were up, he said, give me my wife. I'm paid in full. 7 years. I don't know if you guys know, and I've told this a couple times, so don't, just bear with me, but when we were in Nepal and Florian was asking permission to marry our daughter, we were in this hut way up in the hills out of Kathmandu in the hills. It was surreal, with chickens, and little goats in the house, and I mean, it was pretty bananas growing outside, and he asked, basically, I'll cut to the chase, he asked for permission to marry Alicia, and I told him, I just, off the cuff, said, sure, as long as you work for me for 7 years first. So that's our joke. We always bring that up. So Laban gathered all the men of the place and made a feast. And so I'm going to ask you a question. So this is going back to why this story, I think, is in the Bible. What we can learn from this whole thing. We aren't done with the story, but have you ever broken a bone? How many of you have had broken bones before? Whoa, look at you. I remember getting a basketball on my pinky and breaking my little finger. I remember hitting my little baby toe against the cinder block and breaking it. Those are my big breaks. But breaking a bone. In the Bible, broken bones often speak of a broken life. Sometimes if you have problems with your bones, it really is a picture of your life being broken or crushed. Like David. Remember David in Psalm 32, verses 3 and 4, he said, when I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, day and night your hand was heavy on me. My vitality drained away as with the fever heat of summer. Selah. But in the New International Version, it says right there, when I kept silent about my sin, my bones wasted away. And so David, having committed some pretty outrageous sins, was experiencing his bones wasting away. It's a description of a broken life. It's the consequence of sin in our lives. And so there's that idea of bones wasting away. And then, boy, this doesn't move as quickly as I would like it to. Okay, so all of the inward vitality of life was disappearing in the life of David, King David, because of his sin. And so, here's Psalm 51. He says, make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones, there it is again, the bones which you have broken, the Lord has broken, let them rejoice. He was asking God, he says, I'm miserable. You have broken my bones. Because of my sin, the consequences are like broken bones. And so, boy, I didn't do anything. Oh, there we go. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. So the questions that we have in the life of Jacob, which we're going to look at, some of the questions are this. Can broken bones be healed so that once again my life is joyful? Yes. Can God mend and heal broken lives? There's a question. I can't see you. I don't know what's inside of your heart right now. But it's possible that you're here and inside your bones are crushed and broken. And there's no joy. And there's just sin. And the memory of sin. And the guilt of sin. And like David, you're just saying, I need joy in my life. I need healing in my life. I need God to fix what is broken because of my sin. And so that's really what's going on in the life of Jacob. God, can you mend my life? Can you put it back together again? Now therefore, my son, obey my voice and arise and flee to my brother Laban. That was his mother. That was his mother living in the promised land and saying to her son, Jacob, your brother is ticked at you. Your brother is furious at what you have done to him. You have stolen the birthright. You have connived and schemed, and you have stolen the birthright from him, the blessing from him. And so the mother says, you better flee to Haran and get away from him for a while until his anger subsides. So it wasn't what Jacob really wanted, but it was what was happening. He says, stay with him a few days. That's a really important word. A few days until your brother's fury subsides. And so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him as but a few days. It seemed like a few days. It seems like the few days should be over now, and it's time to go home again after 7 years. It should be, right? But God needed to heal Jacob's broken bones. And so, I guess if you were going to rewrite the ending of the story, 7 years are over. I paid my dues. I have my wife. I'm going to go back to back home with her. Everything's going to be a piece of cake. Seems like a really good deal to me. But God was not finished with Jacob. That's what this story is all about. God was not quite done with him. So, what happened next? So Laban gathered all his men. They had a feast. Now in the evening, he took his... Well, I'm going to skip ahead. We're getting ahead of the story here. Okay, I'm just going to tell the story. Okay, so you know it, but so in the wedding, there's this big, if you know the custom of the day in a wedding, there were, the bride would stay away and not be seen by the husband. That was really normal. We have that kind of in weddings today where the bride doesn't want the husband to see her before the wedding day. And so there's feasting and there's actually kind of like a bachelor party that goes on during that week of feasting leading up to the wedding. And so the bachelors, the men get together and have a feast, and all this is going on. The women are in a separate tent, and but then eventually it comes time for the wedding. And so the husband is shuffled away into the wedding tent, okay? I know this is getting a little racy here, but this is wonderful. God created idea. So the man goes into the tent. There's a torch probably outside, and then he's sitting in there waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for his wife to be brought with the women to the wedding tent. And so it's dark outside. There's a torch there, and the husband is really anxious and wishing this show would get on the road a little bit quicker. And so finally the women come, and the bride is brought to the tent, and she goes in the tent. The torch is extinguished. It's really dark. It's really in darkness. And so that's the wedding night. And the the bride comes with a veil over her face and kind of a hood, because that's a custom in their day where the bride was not to be seen by anyone, by any other man, and not by her husband. And so this is what's really important, is that Laban is the one who arranged for not Rachel, but for Leah to be brought into the tent to be with Jacob for the night. And that happened. Leah came in, and the marriage was consummated that night and in the dark. And then we know that in the morning, in the next morning when it became light, and it's kind of, you probably heard lots of sermons on it. That's the title of the sermon. And behold, Jacob said, behold, it was Leah. It was Leah. And he was furious. He was mad at Laban. He was saying, how could you do this? You have deceived me. You tricked me. You knew that I loved Rachel. I worked 7 years for her, and you did this to me. And he was mad at Laban for deceiving him. What was God doing there? Well, it is payback. It is the grace of, in that moment, showing Jacob his sin. What was his sin? He was the great deceiver. He was the one that his father was dealing with darkness because he was blind, almost blind. And he came in and tricked his father out of the family blessing, out of the birthright. He was a deceiver. He was a schemer. He was a manipulator. And his whole life, his whole being, there before God could bless him in the way that God planned to bless Jacob. And I think it's a really funny story if you know about kids, if you know about having a lot of kids. I mean, Justin and Uliana, they're only partway there. But there was a time when Jacob had 12 children running around the house. And that was, in the culture of the day, of course it's not how we would look at it, but in the culture of the day, he was blessed with 2 wives and their 2 maids and 12 children, which became what? The 12 tribes of Israel. They became the channels of God's blessing to the whole world. And so eventually God was able to bless Jacob. But he first had to confront sin in his life. And all of a sudden, when the sun came up and there was Leah, he was mad at Laban, but God was exposing something deep in his heart that needed to be healed. It needed to be healed. And so what was Jacob's response to all of that? What did he do after it was Leah? What happened next? Which I think shows that there was a response to God's dealing with him. There was a submission to the will and the working of God in his life. What did he do? What was next? He said, okay, I'll go 7 more years. I will work for 7 more years for Rachel. And so he did. And you can read the rest of the story. But I think the point for me is that God must expose and deal with our sinful bents, our sinful patterns of life. We need to stop. We need to get right with God and experience His cleansing and His forgiveness and move on. Because I am convinced God's nature is that He wants to bless His people, but sometimes the blessing is shut up, it's stopped. He can't until sin is dealt with and removed. So much for PowerPoint. But the message is really, really clear. I think we want the blessing of God, without His working in our life, without repentance, without acknowledging sin. We just want God to bless us. We want His blessing, but God says, well, you got to deal with this. It's awful quiet in here. Yesterday at Chad's service, I'll just use Chad as an example. It could be anyone, but when we went to the hospital, he wanted to know whether he was going to go to heaven someday. He wanted to be sure about heaven. And so Kathy and I had 2 chances to talk to him at the hospital. It was amazing. And to my satisfaction, he affirmed his faith in Christ. And that was just such a blessing. And one of the passages that God gave to share with him, because I had just gotten through reading a book called How Good Is Good Enough. And the conclusion of that book is there's nobody that's good enough to get into heaven. There's nobody. Nobody is good enough. And the book kind of describes like a cross-country race where all these runners come with all their numbers on their chest, and they're up to the starting line. And there's no markers, and there's no known finish line, and it's just they're all there to run this race, but they don't know where they're going. And all of a sudden, the starting gun goes off, and they start running, but they don't even know where they're going and how to win this race, and where is it. And that book, How Good You Have to Be for God, is that's how most human beings are today. We are running a race, and many people do not know what God expects. We don't know where the race is supposed to go. We're just trying to be good. We're trying to be better than those people, or trying to be better than a neighbor, or there's some sort of standard of good, but everybody's standard is different. And the most important part of the Bible is that good people do not go to heaven. They don't. You don't go to heaven because you're good. Because good is a relative term.